Hello, my name is Netta Bianchi and welcome to the Kaplan MCAT review video on the formation of identity. In this video, we'll be looking at 4 theories on how identity is formed. We'll begin by poring over Freud's theory of psychosexual development, followed by Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. We'll then examine Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning and end with Vygotsky's theory of cultural and biosocial development. Our learning goal is to identify and order the steps in the development of identity, according to various theories. Our learning goal will enable us to answer questions like the following about the steps in Freud's theory of identity development. As we scrutinize the 4 theories of identity development, keep in mind that these are, after all, theories. It does not necessarily mean that any one of them is correct. In fact, there are numerous controversies surrounding each of these. But you will need to know these theories for the MCAT. Sigmund Freud created the psychosexual theory of identity development. This theory was based on Freud's belief that identity and sexuality were inextricably linked. Freud believed that humans have a libido, or sex drive, from birth, and that identity development is based on attempts to mitigate libidinal tensions that would emerge in life. According to Freud, if an exaggerated or unresolved conflict, such as becoming overly frustrated, emerges at any point in a child's life, the child experiences something called fixation. Freud claimed that fixation would lead to anxiety, and that a personality pattern would develop because of this anxiety. This anxiety would then develop into a mental disorder, which Freud termed neurosis. Freud split psychosexual development into 5 stages. At any one of these stages, an unresolved conflict could emerge and lead to fixation. Each of these steps leads to a specific type of neurosis. The oral stage refers to the first year of life, where libidinal energy is centered on the mouth. You might know that at this age, children put everything, from your favorite sunglasses to their own fingers, into their mouth. Freud claims that this tendency of a child putting objects in his or her mouth is a means of reducing libidinal tension. If fixation or an unresolved conflict emerges at this stage, high levels of dependency might emerge later in life. The anal stage occurs in years 1 through 3 of life, where libidinal energy is centered on the anus. Freud claims that in this stage, libidinal tension is reduced by the gratification that comes with eliminating or retaining human waste. Notice that potty training occurs in this stage. If fixation occurs in this stage, it could lead 2 different ways. Either the child could become super orderly or could become sloppy. The phallic stage occurs from ages 3 to 5, and it has 2 parts, one for females and one for males. The Oedipus complex occurs in male children. To Freud, this conflict was all about jealousy. He believed the son would view his father with envy because of the relationship his father had with his mother. The child would feel guilty about his feelings, and to mitigate this guilt, he would begin several things. First, he would begin to relate to his father. He would begin to develop a sexual identity, and finally, he would internalize some kind of moral code. The child would also take up hobbies or work in order to redirect his libidinal energy. Freud did not mention a great deal about the Electra complex, but it's similar to the Oedipal conflict but for girls. At this stage, females were supposedly less morally developed. Latency occurs from about 5 years to puberty, after the libido has been sublimated, which is a fancy way of saying that the libidinal energy has been redirected to another activity or hobby. In this stage, nothing really happens. The genital stage lasts from puberty to adulthood. According to Freud, if development occurred normally throughout childhood, this stage would be marked by healthy heterosexual relationships. But if development did not occur normally, Freud claimed that other adult relationships would occur. To remember the stages of Freud's psychosexual development theory, you can take the first letter of every stage and remember that orangutans always play with little gorillas. While Freud developed a psychosexual theory of how identity develops, Erik Erikson created the psychosocial theory of identity development, which is based on the conflict between a person's needs and social demands or pressures. The theory places special importance on emotional development and on the role of social environment. The stages in the theory are not linked in the same way that the stages in Freud's theory are linked. Though you do see a chronological progression of the stages, resolving or mastering the central conflict in one stage is not required to move on to the subsequent stage. The resolution of a conflict can either be positive or it can be negative, and it really depends on the skills or traits that an individual gains from that stage and then carries on to the next stage. Erikson claims that in the first year of life, a child faces the trust versus mistrust conflict. If the conflict is resolved positively, the child emerges from the stage trusting both the environment and trusting himself. If the conflict is resolved unfavorably, the child tends to emerge from the stage suspicious of the world. The autonomy versus shame and doubt stage occurs in the first through third years of life. The resolution of this conflict can end favorably with the child feeling that they have choices, self-restraint, and some kind of control. If shame and doubt wins, the child could emerge from this stage with doubt and a feeling of lacking control. In years 3 through 6 of life, a child faces the initiative versus guilt stage. If the conflict is resolved favorably, the child emerges with a sense of purpose, the feeling that they can initiate activities, and the ability to enjoy his or her accomplishments. If the child succumbs to guilt, he could either end up with extensive restrictions on himself or showing off excessively. The industry versus inferiority stage lasts from ages 6 to 12. If industry wins the conflict, the child emerges from the stage feeling competent and feeling that they can use their abilities and intelligence to affect the world. If the conflict is resolved in favor of inferiority, the child will emerge feeling inadequate and having low self-esteem. The identity versus role confusion stage occurs in adolescence. If resolved positively, the adolescent emerges with a feeling of uniqueness and the ability to have ongoing loyalties. The unfavorable outcomes of this stage include identity confusion and a personality that constantly changes. Individuals can emerge from young adulthood with intimacy or with isolation. If intimacy wins the conflict, then an individual gains love, the ability to be intimate with other people, and a commitment to other people. If isolation wins the conflict, then an individual distances himself from others and avoids commitment. The generativity versus stagnation stage occurs in middle age. Successful resolution of this stage results in an individual who feels that they are a productive and caring member of a society. If the conflict is resolved unfavorably, then an individual might emerge bored or self-centered. Finally, as an individual ages, they face the integrity versus despair conflict. If the conflict is resolved favorably, an individual gains wisdom and an acceptance that his or her life has been meaningful. If integrity wins the conflict, then an individual is also prepared for death. The unfavorable outcomes of this conflict include bitterness and a feeling that life was worthless. Individuals in despair tend to fear death. Let's leave theories about resolving conflicts and urges and explore a theory of development that focuses on moral thinking. Kohlberg claimed that as our brain develops, we can consider complexity or complex situations to a greater degree. This then, in turn, determines our concepts of right and wrong and our solutions to moral dilemmas. He organized moral reasoning into 6 stages, which he then separated into 3 overarching phases: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional morality. To develop his theory, Kohlberg presented subjects with a moral dilemma. He listened to their responses and was interested in the reasoning behind the moral decision the individual made about the dilemma. We'll use an example called the Heinz dilemma to see how individuals at each stage of moral reasoning might respond to a moral dilemma. Here's a scenario. A man named Heinz has a wife who's dying of a rare cancer. There's one druggist in the town who's invented a drug, but he charges 10 times what it cost him to produce the drug. Unfortunately, Heinz can't afford this price, so he goes to the druggist and he asks him if he could get a discount. Unfortunately, the druggist refuses. In an act of desperation to save his wife, Heinz breaks into the druggist's office and he steals the medication. How would individuals at each stage of Kohlberg's moral thinking respond to this moral dilemma? The pre-conventional morality phase of Kohlberg's moral reasoning occurs in pre-adolescence, and it focuses on the consequences of a moral choice. Stage 1 emphasizes avoiding punishment. So an individual in stage 1 might respond to the Heinz dilemma with, he could get arrested. Stage 2 focuses on gaining reward. So an individual in stage 2 might think, well, he could live a long time with his wife if he does steal the drugs. The conventional morality phase develops in early adolescence, and it lasts until about adulthood, when people begin to understand themselves based on their relationship to others. Stage 3 deals with obedience and focuses on social norms and rules that an individual tries to obey. A person who has reached stage 3 of moral reasoning might hear the Heinz dilemma and think it's not okay to steal. Stage 4 focuses on law and order. It's an attempt to maintain social order. And individuals in this stage might say, well, if Heinz broke the rules, then everyone might start breaking the rules. Post-conventional morality is not something that everyone achieves. It's a type of higher-level reasoning that occurs in adulthood, if at all. It focuses on social mores, and the social contract stage is stage 5, which focuses on individual rights and moral rules that are intended to ensure the greater good. A stage 5 response to the Heinz dilemma might be that the druggist shouldn't be overcharging for the drug. Stage 6 involves the consideration of abstract and universal human ethics. A person in stage 6 of moral reasoning might respond to the Heinz dilemma with, a human life has infinite worth. Much like Freud and Erikson's theories, Kohlberg's theory has stages that progress chronologically. As the individual moves forward in time and in maturity, they adopt a viewpoint or stage and then abandon that and move on to the next one. So stages 1 through 6 occur chronologically. You should also keep in mind that there are several controversies surrounding Kohlberg's theory. For example, his research focused on males, so he might have left out potential key differences between males and females in terms of moral reasoning. Another theory focused on cognitive development is Vygotsky's cultural and biosocial theory of identity development. Vygotsky believed that as a child internalized a culture, including the symbols and skills, languages, etc., his or her cognition would also progress. He posited that individuals have a zone of proximal development, which is just a set of skills and abilities that are on the cusp of being learned, but they require the help of a knowledgeable other. For example, a child might be struggling to learn how to ride a bike. This skill would then be categorized as a skill in the zone of proximal development. Any adult that helps the child learn is considered the knowledgeable other. Let's see how the MCAT could test our knowledge of the concepts in this video. Read and answer the following practice question. The answer is C. Freud's theory of identity development deals with a chronology of stages that focus on decreasing libidinal tensions. To remember the order, you can remember that orangutans always play with little gorillas. In this case, the phallic stage is also called the Oedipal stage. If you had trouble with this question, go back and review Freud's 5 stages of psychosexual development. Read and answer this practice question. The answer is C. Erikson's theory focuses on a set of stages that are based on conflicts that can be resolved either positively or negatively. If you'd like to review this concept, check out Erikson's theory of psychosocial development of identity. Try your hand at this practice question. The answer is A. The child is working very hard or struggling to learn how to tie his shoes. Vygotsky would claim that shoe tying is a skill in his zone of proximal development. He'll need a knowledgeable other to help him learn. If you had trouble with this question, review Vygotsky's theory of cognitive or identity development. Let's look at some of the takeaways from this video. Freud's psychosexual theory development includes oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. At each of these stages, an individual attempts to mitigate libidinal tensions. Erikson's theory deals with needs and social demands and focuses on a set of internal conflicts or stages, such as trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. Resolution of the conflict can either end positively or negatively and leads to skills that an individual takes on to the next stage. Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning has 3 phases, the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional morality phases. Kohlberg studied how individuals at different phases or stages respond to moral dilemmas. Vygotsky's theory claims that an individual progresses in cognition as they internalize a culture. His theory deals with the zone of proximal development, in which a more knowledgeable other is required for a child to learn a skill. Thank you for watching the Kaplan MCAT review video on the formation of identity.